Okay, everybody. So just a quick introduction of what we're here to talk about, and a little bit about how we've come to this position and everything else. As I said, please, if you've got any questions to ask them in the chat box. I can bring you into the conversation live towards the end if you want to ask a question to the panel. But as John just mentioned there, our industry has fallen off the shelf, worth 70 billion to the UK economy, fell off the shelf in March. It's affected thousands of people and businesses, and everyone is keen to get live back into the business. But what is live and what is the new norm going to be? With my EMA hat on, I sit on the board of the BVEP with fellow industry associations. The BEP have been engaged with the DCMS, that's the Department of Digital, Cultural, Media and Sports, to push a number of key issues and challenges into government. One of our associations, Meeting Industry Association, have recently completed a new paper, cross-industry piece of research that has gone with some strong recommendations into government, which if we're on the radio earlier, you would have heard that they're really now talking about it. And this is about the reduction of distance rule from 2 meters to 1 meter or less. And of course, it's now getting battered backwards and forwards across the Commons. And with Boris saying yes to wanting to lower when we can, but of course now everybody attacking him for it. So when are we going to get back? We don't know, but hopefully we will have some information on that shortly. EMA ourselves, we did some research, talking to our members and getting a general view of the market. The will be slow to return, whilst some considering activity in Q4 of this year. The majority of our members are looking at events and activities next year. The view is until a vaccine is in circulation, technology will lead activity, meaning live streamings, webinars will be the norm, with the introduction of live, which our panel will talk about, as and when we're able to introduce that. So we can talk about a little bit about what we're already up to. And as that, what we at EMA have done is we set up a working group, which Anna and Christopher sit on, with another colleague from Goldman Sachs, Mark Gill, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. And together they're drawing up some guidelines of best practices and recommendations to share with our members in a week or so. These are not official. Each member will need to adapt those and create their own policy to fit. But our objective is that this is a collaboration of working together and how we can share and speed up the process and take it. We're grateful for all input from members. If anybody's got anything to add, to throw into the mix, reach out to any of us, have that discussion, or send to me and I'll forward. So to get things kicked off, Christopher, can I hand over to you to give us a top line of where you are with stuff?
Yes, thank you for that, Richard, and thank you for everybody who's joining us. Where we are at the moment, as Richard mentioned, the group consists of Anna Fox from Liberty Global, Mark Gill from
Goldman Sachs.
Apologies, and myself, and we're each heading up a work stream each. So we're looking at it from a case of pre-event, what do you need to do before, what answers do you need to, what questions do you need to ask, and what the legalities are. That's headed up by Anna. Mark is heading up venues, so what venues are going to be needing to be doing differently before we sign in and we work with them. And myself, I'm looking at, along with my cohorts, what actually we need to be doing when we're on site. At the moment, we've really spent the last week and a half going through the vast amounts of different white papers that we've been receiving, documents that we've been receiving from venues and hotels, talking about what they're working on. So it's really just been about the last 10 days digesting all the information that we've got through and picking out the common threads and which parts of these the information we can work with going forward.
Excellent. Okay. I know you're going to ask me at one point, can you share the screen? Because I had a couple of slides for you, but I thought I could, but it doesn't seem I can, Christopher. So that's struggling with that. So if we get to the point we talk about the triangle, I think you'll have to help people visualize that. Okay.
So as a group, we are making some assumptions. So those assumptions are travel. People are going to be able to travel there. That will generally be internal UK travel at the moment, unless they do want to go through to the self-quarantine piece. The second part that we're going to be assuming is that people are going to be able to have accommodation at the venues where we're going to be holding the events. And the third part that we're making assumptions on at the moment is social distancing will decrease at some point. So whether or not that will be down to 1 metre or lower to 1 metre, social distancing will be decreasing. We've split the events into a pyramid shape. First part of that pyramid is events from 0 to 50. So these are the events that we could see returning maybe in the next 6 months, but probably the last 3 months of this year. So that 0 to 50 will take into account your CEO meetings. It could take into account a socially distanced dinner where people are sat down, but it will be a number between about 0 and 50. The second number that we're looking at will be the sort of 50 to 150 straight 200 people. Those type of events we do see returning at the earliest, probably from about the beginning of next year, realistically. So that's the events that we see are going to be most of the events we do, the ones that will fit in with venues at the moment. The last part of that pyramid was the large mass scale of events, so that would be 500 people and over. Those types of events have currently been tackled by the World Health Organization. They've got a great page at the moment where it talks through the risk assessments and what people will need to be thinking about those events when they do start them.
Okay, so Christopher, jumping in there, what you're going to talk about now, you and Anna, is the centre of that triangle. Yeah, we're going to sort of focus the conversation, and the work that we're doing is around that sort of 50 to 200 conferences and meetings. Yeah.
Yes, okay, that's correct.
Cool.
Anna, would you like to go first?
Well, before we jump on that, where are we on key dates and deliverables? Because we were talking, we want to take something to the membership.
So key dates and deliverables. So we would get something out to the membership about the 22nd of June. So our 3 strands will be finished probably by the end of next week. We'll then share something with the membership by the 22nd. And we then expect to be able to get something up on the website for people to look at from around about the 29th. So that's when we'll then be able to share with venues and organisations, etc.
Yeah, we want to get around the table with the other side of the venues and the agencies to discuss our thinking and approach to make sure that fits with what their approach is. Yeah.
Yes, very, very much so. Very, very much so.
Okay. So, Anna, you're leading on the pre-event details. So presumably that's the registration, the contracts, the force majeure, which everyone's going to be interested in. So update us on that. Where are you on that and your approach?
Well, I guess that whole process, I mean, for me, it's about a journey and looking at every step of the process, just like you would from concept to completion of an event. And I think we need to look at this in the same way, in the way in which we tackle the new procedures that we're going to have to put in place. And I think people's fears are going to be one of the biggest hurdles of getting back to normal. So we do have a duty of care to reassure our delegates, whether internal or external clients, reassure them of the steps and measures and the processes that we put in place in advance of the event. I think business leaders will look to event professionals in order to show that they've looked at risk assessments and crisis management, and that's been thought of before you can even deliver an event. And I think now is the time to put a policy in place, particularly if other parts of the business manage events. If you don't have a core central events team, for example, and there's EAs or other parts of the business that are managing events as well, so they will need to also follow the procedure or the policy to ensure all the risks have been mitigated, so there's no recourse. You know, there's nothing that's going to come back basically in the events team or anything in the business that you've not thought of things. And I think also there's a risk of events being a challenge with businesses, and they're going to be the last thing to return. I think as industry professionals, or the in-house professionals, we need to be better at championing live events. There's a huge benefit to them, the face-to-face events, interactive events, and making sure that we are a champion for them and bringing them back in the right way. So for joining instructions, I think, or any pre-event registration, again, I think there needs to be a paragraph, certainly for the join instructions that I write and send out, there needs to be a paragraph of reassurance on how we're going to safeguard employees during the event, in the run up to that. So I think that would just need to be a paragraph of the steps that we've taken, how we're working with the venues, what they can expect to see on site, how things might have changed as well from what they're used to having or used to seeing on site. So I think that reassurance has to come from us first and foremost. But then there's also about their behaviours as well and how we would expect them to behave on site. And I think we're all used to now, you know, going to the supermarket and the social distancing, and whilst the guidelines will probably decrease in terms of that space, again, I think there's that perception on site, and making sure that delegates feel safe when they're there. In your pre-registration, now there's not any official guidelines that have come out yet regarding GDPR and what we can ask in advance. So we're still waiting on the guidelines, but I think we need to be mindful of what we can ask around temperature checks, or whether they declare if they've been to a country that might be a high risk. So I think we need to be mindful of that as well. And then in terms of the legal, I mean, that's, you know, that's a whole other thing that we need to look into, but force majeure and the way that that's written historically hasn't included pandemics. There's very few contracts that I've seen that have included pandemics, and it's likely they're going to be rewritten to include pandemics, because companies are, you know, they're not going to want to cancel and go through this again the way that they have before. So there's a lot around the cancellation policy. And I think if you have an internal legal team, have them look over the contracts to check for the force majeure, to make sure you understand what you're liable for, what we're liable for, what the venue's liable for, and any potential consequences. That could have a real negative effect on the business or the brand of the venue as well, if that's not adhered to. And also just to check, are you legally supported by the business to sign events contracts? And on behalf of the company, I know that I am not. We have 2 people in our London office, very senior guys, that sign all of our contracts, and we do go through all the appropriate channels with our legal team to check all of the terms and conditions. And now they're going to be really honing in on force majeure as well. So there could be a separate addendum that you want to include, just to kind of safeguard yourself in terms of cancellation. We've looked briefly also into event insurance, and it's unlikely to cover pandemics because insurance companies are just not going to want to pay out. So that's another thing that we need to be mindful of when we're contracting with venues. There could be negotiations in terms of our venues or suppliers willing to defer if we do get a second wave of this, or if an event needs to cancel again. Will they be willing to defer and say, right, we will rebook within 12 months, then you guarantee the business to that venue. So I think venues are going to be not as hardline about it, but try to work with us, because ultimately they don't want to lose the business nor the relationships that you've built up as well. I think we're going to have to relearn on site our guest welcome experience as well. So it's implementing new procedures for arrival, for registration, for your breakout periods. It could be you want to look at where you would normally have like your breakouts, for example. You might not want to go to a venue where there is a shared foyer area and everyone's got their own individual areas for their tea and coffee breaks. You might want to have sort of private or exclusive use. So that's another consideration, I think, in terms of what you're looking at in venues and how you safeguard your employees on site as well.
So let me just jump in there and to the audience, if the chat function is working, because I can't see anybody, only a few people have thrown some chat in there. But a lot of the stuff, as you're now starting to develop the process, is asking the questions, what if? What if? So, you know, can we ask the questions of an attendee before they attend? You know, have you been self-isolated, or are you clear? Do you have any health issues? Because there's like advice to people, and then directing them, saying, you know, well, if you have health issues, perhaps you shouldn't attend, but you can, presumably you will be able to join through streaming. Yeah. And so that's part of the GDPR stuff, isn't it? Of what you can ask and what you can dictate or persuade people with, as well as then.
And I think until the guidelines come out, you know, we can only make assumptions now, but that could vary from different companies as well as to what they're willing to ask in advance.
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to get detailed guidelines from government. It's going to be left to us to make our own, like I sort of said, guidelines around certain things. You know, there'll be advice. The government advice is that, you know, if you're a person with a high level of potential danger, then you shouldn't go out. So our communication to those people is that if you are of this category, then please join us on webinar. You know, don't attend, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
On the other side, so like, I'm giving you a scenario. So which we don't know the answer, I'm assuming, but if a venue was to, or a hotel, have COVID-19 discovered in its venue whilst we're in there or the day before, and it had to shut down, what would you perceive the outcome to be from that? Or how would you look to work that into an agreement or contract?
Yeah, of course. And that's something that's probably fairly bespoke, I would imagine, to the organisation and the type of events that you're doing as well. But that's where you would need to get the legal advice, or have an internal team or an external team, and just kind of understand, even from the venue, what that means for your events and your terms and conditions.
Okay, so all right, so those are the things that we're going to sort of be coaxing out in this process, to sort of have some guidelines to make sure that we've covered on this, or that you're addressing this. Because I'm going to say, presumably, and that's where we need to talk to the venues about, is that if you've got a booking in place, you want that booking to happen. If there's another peak, we're probably going to want to cancel that and walk away from it, and not necessarily be held to reinstate that event in 6 months' time, because pulling all of those elements together to do in 6 months' time is not easy, and you've probably got something else in 6 months' time. Yeah. So it's not like we could just reinvent this event. You'd have to go virtual with that event, which is probably where we are with the hybrid, isn't it? So you'd still have your event, you might not have it at a venue. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or there's the hybrid option if people are not comfortable traveling, and that could be something that you gauge in the lead up to the event. If you know that you're going to put an event on and you're comfortable that it's safe, that you've checked the venue, that you've considered all the options, you might want to consider a pre-event survey to get a gauge from people. Are they willing to travel? If they're international delegates, would they be willing to travel? Just so you can have an idea of numbers, and then maybe look at the venue to see, well, what's their AV capabilities? What could they do in terms of a live link, so that people shouldn't have to miss out. So it's creating that hybrid for those that do want to attend in person versus those sessions that you might want to do that are via a live link.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the potential for what different types of events. So we talked about the hub and spoke. So it might be a central production out to 3 or 4 smaller events in other countries, in other cities, or across Europe or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so Christopher, take me now into what we're doing from a sort of the supply base. Just looking at, presumably that's venues and everything else. I think you're going to cover off on Mark's side, where he was looking at all the different suppliers and agreements with suppliers, as well as then you're looking at is then how we interact and function on site.
So Mark's group, they're going through a number of supplier considerations. The very first thing they're going to be looking at is what is that venue's COVID-19 policy, and are they sharing it with their customers as well? So that's literally going to be the starting point of everything that we work with when we're working with suppliers. So we would expect people to have that now. We would expect it to be on their website. We'd expect it to be communicating with their regular customers that come to their venues as well. Supplier considerations is also going to be events budget. So there's going to be less people in these spaces. There's probably going to be more likely to be higher running costs as well, because you're looking at extra cleaning staff, you're looking at maybe bathroom staff, you're just looking at extra bodies on the floor from start to finish for these things with a reduced number of people. So events budget is going to be a big consideration when we start talking to venues as well. We're going to be looking, as Anna mentioned, venue contracting. So what would happen if there was a further lockdown when your event was booked in 3 months' time, if we do get a second wave indeed. I touchly briefed on, we're going to be looking at venues capacities. So most venues that we're speaking to currently are probably going to be operating at about 25 to 30% capacity as well. So we're going to be looking at how these rooms are going to be spaced out, how they're going to be managing the people that are going to be on site as well. Other things we're going to be looking at when speaking to venues is what other events are taking place at the same time. We're obviously going to be managing our own people that are at these events as well, but if there's 2 or 3 going place in a large venue that you're looking at, they manage the flow, and how will they work out, how will these people. We're going to be looking at catering, so format of catering breaks. So thoughts at the moment seem to be that China cups will be a no-go. It will be disposable cups and lids that are used for people. Food is going to be pre-packaged, so the piles of fruit and cookies and everything that we're used to with tea and coffee breaks, or indeed the buffet lunches, or then going into canapes, etc. in the evening. So that's all going to have to change, and that's all going to have to.
Christopher, let me take a step back then.
We then get on to
step back into your suppliers. So many corporates, so both of you probably have your preferred suppliers, let's say from a production point of view. Are you still going to be looking or to take those in on site? And do you envisage difficulties? Again, this probably fits back into your area, Anna, and everything else. But if you want to take your production crew in, are the hotels going to be saying, yes, you can, or no, you can't? Or these are the people that can come in and can't? Because that, again, is potentially bringing people and equipment onto site that aren't necessarily under, I'm thinking alive now, so this is alive, not necessarily under the auspice of the hotel, for example. So who's accountable, who's responsible if they were to bring something in?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more strict measures in preferred suppliers. I think a lot of venues, we're already hearing murmurings of restaurants having this kind of like that food safety sticker that you get in the window of being a 5 on the food, scale of a COVID secure restaurant or venue, and that they will test employees prior, temperature checks or whatever it is, so that they know that all of their staff on site are safe. And so it could be that you won't even make it onto a preferred supplier list if those suppliers don't adhere to the same tests that the venue are expecting. So they might not let random suppliers come in. So I might have a preferred supplier, but if they don't adhere to the venue guidelines, it could be that we can't work with them on site. So I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. And I think venues are going to be more strict with that, particularly.
So you think, well, that's an interesting conversation, isn't it, to have around the table with hoteliers and agencies that, the question would be is that, well, okay, if you can't use your preferred supplier, would you come to our venue? Or you know, no, we'll be happy to work with your preferred supplier because these are the restrictions that you have put in place. But because I know that production is so personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's, you know your producer, you know your core crew, you know,
Yeah.
you know the guys that are doing that job for you, they're running the floor of the conference for you.
Yeah.
Whilst you're looking after everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's already a lot of venues that will only work to a preferred supplier list.
Right.
And you have to use one of their, you know, AV guys, their technicians, or whoever it is that you're bringing in. So, but then I would also hope that they have gone through the same measures and they're just as strict with that. You know, just like they have to provide risk assessments and everything in advance anyway. I think that's just going to be another layer, isn't it?
Yeah, it might be that if we've got our awful word, a pet producer, the one that, you know, that one person in that room that we 110% trust. So it's okay, we want to bring that person in to work alongside your in-house production.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that, Christopher?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's such a personal thing. And again, when we start speaking to external suppliers, whether or not that be speaker or whether or not that be an AV crew, it's going to be very much a conversation around what do they do and how can they ensure us that they're acting in a safe way, and also amongst each other as well. So there's going to be a lot of crews work with casual staff that might have come from one job the day before to another job where you are. How are they going to be managing? So I think for me, it's going to be a lot more questioning when I speak to people to work out how these people are assembled. Have they been in public spaces? Have they been in any danger? Were there any venues where they've been in that outbreaks have happened? So there's going to be a lot more questioning and a lot more communication between people.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then
other things on our list.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at everything from face masks to sanitizing stations to venue layout, venue staffing, even the way down to cloakrooms. How are cloakrooms going to work? You wouldn't want your coat in a pile with 250 other coats along with your bag, etc. So it's going to be down to that level of detail when we're speaking with venues about how things are managed. Next part, on site. So again, when we're working on site with people, it's going to be a very different world. We're going to be looking at when people are registered, how they're queuing, are they keeping a distance from people? The most likely is going to be that no longer a stray delegate that turns up, that you can just add them to list without thinking about it anymore. Those considerations are going to be into account. What you do when things like that happen. We're going to be looking at keeping delegate lists probably for a lot longer after the event, should anything happen. And again, you've got that whole GDPR piece in mind when you're looking after those lists as well. If a delegate gets poorly when they're on site, how do you get them home safely? Whose responsibility is that? So it's going to be a lot detailed with when you're working with people on site as well as the whole, how do you move them around the building, how many people are in a lift, how do you keep them away from each other, is that your responsibility, is that the venue's responsibility? So there's a myriad of questions about working with people on site.
On the, and going back then to your registration and stuff like that, asking people for, you know, tick the box if you have private health insurance or, you know, health insurance, or means unlikely to the first 6 months of next year, I think, about overseas visitors. But even, okay, if we're going into overseas visitors, that, yeah, they have health insurance, or they are accountable for their own health requirements. You know, because again, it's like if someone, like you say, if someone is taken sick, what is the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that, you know, again, you would ask in advance if you're going to do either an event survey or your pre-registration, whether you go through a registration portal or however you register your delegates. And again, that falls back into the GDPR. What can we ask them? Can we ask them to declare where they have travelled in the 7 days leading up to it? But it's also about having those resources on site as well. So is there a sick room, for example? I mean, in any circumstances, you know, if somebody falls ill at an event, even before COVID, what did you do with those people? Was there an area that was a safe place that somebody could you know, sit quietly or recover? Who's on site in terms of first aiders? Is it, you know, does the buck stop with the event organizer, or are you always reliant on making sure the venue has got people that are in place and making sure that you've got the necessary PPE equipment if somebody does fall ill, so you can safeguard yourself as well? I'm not saying about handing out masks. I think once live events come back, and I know we've already discussed this, for me, once live events come back, we won't be using face masks, but it's about having that if somebody should fall ill and having that backup as well.
Yeah.
And I think agendas need to be reconsidered. You know, we're used to trying to cramming in so much content into an event and going back to back to back to back with sessions. You're going to have to allow for time, as Christopher said, for people to get into the lifts, to move to another part of the building for a breakout session, to now allow enough times for time for toilet breaks. All of that has to be built in, so you're not going to see as much cramming, I don't think, in between. You know, with the sessions, you've got to allow time for people to move around safely.
Yeah, large toilet queues.
Yeah, absolutely. And cleaning less, yeah.
Yeah, so Christopher, are we going to do some work on event space and what would work in rooms, or is that where we start to talk to the venues to sort of say, you know, what are your guidelines going to be? How many people can fit in this room?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, at the moment with 2 meters, every person is going to need to be in a 4 meters, and a lot of the venues are going to work out. If we are going to be returning to live quite quickly, a lot of the venues will need to be working out how that's going to work. I mean, the ones that I would look at are the venues that are going to have presentation theatres, easily mark out fixed seats so you know how people are distanced away from each other. So for me, if you're a venue with a presentation theatre and you can start doing that, that will give you, in lots of cases, an edge over other venues as well.
Yeah, well, we know,
and also as well, we touched briefly on.
Yeah, sorry, we know as in talking between ourselves and the wider EMA leadership group and everything else, the 2 meter rule just won't wing it. You know,
yeah.
You can't be walking around with a space around you of 2 by 2 meters square. Yeah. It's just not physically, it's like a room that would take 80 people, but let's say 8 tables of 10 will now take 16 people, 2 people per table. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, and I don't think we would do live events if we were still under those guidelines, would we? And I think the pyramid that we had discussed, if you look at the top of the pyramid, or, meetings, board meetings, etc., up to sort of 25, 30 people, you could comfortably do that in a space and still give 1 meter, 1.5 meter space and have that many people around a table. It's a lot easier to herd them around, whether it's staggered lunch breaks or whatever we need to do. It's easier to do that for that many people, but it's that middle tier, isn't it, that we're concentrating on, and have to be mindful of how we manage and whether it's worthwhile putting that event on if we have to adhere still to those guidelines. Because you want the user experience to be a good experience ultimately and worthwhile to run the event.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, does it? It comes down to we start talking about the pest analysis, and if we look at the psychological part of this, is there is a reason for going to this event. And one is I need to feel involved and engaged in it all and be part of it, get what I can from it. But it's also, the networking, the talking to one another. If I can't, if I have to do that by shouting across a room to you, it just doesn't
it loses its gleam a little bit, doesn't it?
But that's the assumption. We're working, and I think that's key for everybody that's listening, that we are working on the assumption that the distancing rule will be by the time we come back to live, will be reduced to 1 meter or even less, as in sort of common sense. I'm sorry, Krista, I've jumped on your bits there. Do you want to talk more about flow and space?
That's fine. Yeah, so I mean, the ones that seem to have got it right at the moment, that I would imagine people are going to be following, are going to be the supermarket models. They're the ones that have worked all the way through this. So it's going to be about clear direction. It's going to be about knowing how many people are in your building at that time. It's going to be knowing about, you're not just thinking about how many guests you've got in that room. You need to factor in how many wait staff are going to be there at the time, how many operations staff are going to be there, how many of your events team are going to be there. So when you're looking at capacities, the one thing I would say to people, don't just think about it as the amount of guests you can invite to something. Really think about how many people are going to be in that room at any one time, and that's going to probably reduce your numbers down even less.
Yeah.
The one area that I think is going to come out really, really top through this is tech. So we touched on it briefly earlier. It's now going to make a massive difference to picking one there as to how well either the tech is already in there, or how easily your tech can work. So when we are looking at venues, I would be asking them, if you did have 2 cameras in there, where would those cameramen sit? Where would your staging be, with your new reduced numbers, etc.? So I think we will be very, very much looking at venues to give us help and advice, because for event managers, this last 3 months has probably moved us on 5 years in tech, when whereas before we were just thinking of staging, front projection or back projection. Now it's a whole new conversation, and as event managers, we've had to learn very, very quickly. If you are a venue and you know about different systems, holding things to add to your event to make it more interactive, I think these are going to be the things that we're going to be looking at venues to be getting help and advice on.
Yeah, and that's, I think we've got to, again, goes probably parts into Anna's role right at the beginning and your roles, and how looking at this is, what capability does the venue have, and predominantly what is what as they call the pipe, the amount of Wi-Fi broadband that they have got to be able to broadcast out of, because predominantly we will be doing so. Like our EMA exchange event tomorrow morning at 8:30, we have Orson from the Financial Times talking about how he shifted all of his events to online, and that would be a great one to talk about the questions they ask at the venues to make sure that they do have the broadcast ability to be able to take what's coming out of the venue to be able to get it out there. It is, at the end of the day, it's the pipe, it's the size of their pipe, and the amount of bandwidth that is available for getting information out of the property and into the property as well. Because if you're beaming in and out, you're not doing this on the back of a BT broadband home Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
there's a bit more capability on that.
Hopefully,
very important that we need to know that before going in.
but I think it is important, because you want it to feel inclusive, and some people, there could be travel restrictions, or there could be personal reasons that people don't feel comfortable to attend, which is why these hybrid events, or having that bandwidth on site to be able to, rather than flying a speaker in from the US, to just be able to do a live link like we're doing now, and they can still speak at a conference, just as we've shown today that you could do the hybrid. And so those that are local, if they're just regional events that we're looking at to start with, then you do that, but you can still have international delegates and you can still have international guests, but it's making sure there is that bandwidth.
Yeah, and what was interesting, just to throw in another thing, a friend of mine was involved in the EY Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, which were broadcast last week. And that would normally have been in Monaco. I think there would have been like 1,000 people attending, or 400. It's not, a big but not a massive audience and everything else. And of course, they had to take it virtual. It touched 10. They had an audience of 10 million people watching it around the world in different time zones, and that's, I'm sure, is now increased with people watching it, after the event had happened. But there they had pre-recorded parts of the presentation. They had some live presentation, and they did it in partnership with CNBC, and it was absolutely, interaction between live and pre-recorded, and ran pretty well. Pretty good. I give them a 9 out of 10 as the first event they've done like that. But you could also see how big your events can go.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what many companies are now learning, that we can touch a much bigger audience than just the people that the delegates in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can also still have your breakout sessions. If you've got that live link and you've got people all over, whether it's UK or all over the world, they will all come together in a regional capacity. So you've still got that event. And then if you need breakout sessions, they would work together in their own regions, essentially, if you wanted to do it that way as well. So I think it's about being clever about the way in which we look at events. For us as event organisers and still learning, there's so much technology now. And whereas it might not have been as much of a consideration before, I think a lot of our content now is going to be driven by what we can offer from a technical point of view. And it's not just about the voting technology anymore and seeing it pop up on the screen, but it's about that interactive, immersive experience and how we can still offer quality events to delegates, whether they're in the room or not.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges is when we start to put on our first few events is understanding, what our audience are going to feel like, and how it's going to be a gamble to how many people are going to come, because we can break down the audience into different demographics, and certainly there'll be generally the younger people in the organizations, everything else, who are keen to get back to live, keen to network, keen to attend events. I know of people that are climbing the walls wanting to get back to their offices, and I know other people who are like, this is working, this is quite nice, I can work well from home, I'm getting stuff done, it's all happening, I'm safe, etc., and there's so it's going to be interesting, isn't it, with that mixing in those demographics. I think that's, again, at the on-site with the pre-event, a lot of time needs to be spent in that area thinking, okay, is a live event right for this audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the pre-event survey, Mike.
And the audience bit is very, very, when you look at the numbers, if you're looking at like you said, Richard, an internal younger audience, they're probably more likely to want to come back to an event. If you're looking at a sales team, they're probably more interested in going out and networking with people and meeting up with other people. If you were looking at an older clientele where it was just a hospitality event, they're probably less likely to come. So with venues, it's a real case of really, really know your audience and the people who they invite as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of talk about, what is the new normal? And I think the new normal will be a better normal than what it was before, because we will all appreciate things a little bit better. And I think people will eventually want to have that social interaction again. As humans, I think we need that interaction for so many reasons, whether it's, social, emotional, or just the mental well-being. So I think businesses will look for quality. They will look to us to bring new ideas and ways of working. They want to have that independence and that purpose to have that event. But I think people will adapt and businesses will come to adapt, and we will bounce back as an industry. We'll get through it.
Yeah, I think I don't think any question there in my mind of the innovation and everything else. I just think that to me is the exciting part of this is the future integration of technology and being able to reach a much wider audience. Because lots of times there's people who want to attend something, couldn't attend something because they've got something else on, there's somebody else somewhere else in the world, but hey, well, dialing into a webinar is gives me 50% to 60% of the value than the additional value is if I was to be able to attend in person. I just what I'm losing out on is the networking and the meeting, face-to-face opportunities that arise from that.
And we must get sick of the technology and the WebEx and the talking heads, after a while, it's already tiring, right? So, but again, I think there is a need to be able to offer that, but I think people will eventually want to get back to the social aspect, but we will all be a little bit more cautious as a result.
All right, so guys, I am opening up the floor to questions. I haven't seen much coming into the chat room, so I don't know if anybody's got any questions they want to ask or any input that they want to give to the session. This is a session with EMA members. We're trying to gather information from you guys as well, but half of me tells me it's not working properly. I don't know. but other than that, you know, we will be moving over in 5 minutes to the networking group. So Christopher, Anna, you got anything else you want to ask? I know we want to talk about the timeline again, and working with. Yeah. So let's just quickly talk about
So we're
Christopher, the engagement with the industry. So I think our intention is that we are going to create a webinar or a discussion group, and I would suggest we have 2 or 3 hotel groups there, and maybe 2 or 3 kind of events agencies, and maybe a production agency. Some things going, so that we can have this conversation around the table with them, saying, look, okay, these are how we feel as corporates, and this is what we, you know, we've discussed this with our members. This is the way that we see it happening. Because of course, you know, the agencies and the production companies and the venues, they just see their event. They want that event to happen. You've got a community of people and a corporation that is, you know, managing risk and brand. You know, there's a lot of chances there in putting these events back on. So it's a manage. You know, you've got all that to manage, and so this is what you need to make sure we're comfortable and safe with in delivering that. So we're going to have some stuff that we're looking for. We want to share that and discuss that in an open forum with the supply chain.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, that piece speaking to agencies and suppliers is very, very, very important to us, because we can, what we might think is incredibly important on an assumption that they're doing is most likely very, very different than that's actually what's happening as well. And a lot of venues will have been speaking about getting back to live literally from the day that we stopped. So there's a lot of teams on site. And like we said earlier, a lot of our time has been spent going through these amazing documents and working out what people are actually doing. And some venues are doing an amazing job. Some venues are really, really doing an amazing job already.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's encouraging, I think, you know, to hear that hotels are going to open again from the 4th of July. I mean, that's a lot of the big 5-star London hotels, I think is really encouraging.
Yeah, it's that start for tourism, isn't it? People being able to start to travel and to stay overnight in places, and the business people, you know, certain places are already open, but it's these gatherings of people at the moment is still, you know, okay, yes, you can have a wedding now, but it's 10 people outdoors.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been very good this afternoon.
Yeah, true. But look, you know what? If in a few weeks' time I can book myself into the Barclay and have those nice sheets and that no room service at mine, that's for sure.
Oh, we're going to plug there for the Barclay, one of your favourites. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then just to wrap up then, we have a working timeline, everybody, that we're working to, which is the end of next week, to be able to get something as a draft document to the membership, to then have a webinar the following week with that, to discuss that, agree and take any input from members, and then be able to have a cross-industry discussion on the week of the 29th, which basically will take any feedback, any input, and then sort of wrap up that document, which we roll out the following week as our guidelines. Does that sounds about right?
Yeah.
Quite a bit to do,
sounds perfect,
because it's going to be constantly evolving as well as changes as and when we know government guidelines. So it's all presumably, you know, in the fantasies to say, well, subject to government guidelines.
Yeah, of course. And just keeping our finger on the pulse, I think, as well, and listening to suppliers and listening to each other, what we're hearing, what corporates are doing, just to try and stay on top of everything and as things move and evolve.
Yeah, as I said, so that's, you know, we have to stick a stick in the ground and start things moving and thinking about this, and not waiting for the government guidelines to come out, because then it's too late to do anything. We need to start making some assumptions and move forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm going to
Exactly.
now wrap up this meeting.